Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up. General Manager Brian Gutekunst announcing on Tuesday morning that Jordan Love undergoing a procedure on his left thumb, non-throwing hand, torn ligament. Hopeful that he's back at practice next week. Should not affect his status for week one. I just wanted to hop on, do a quick video, look at this through a couple of different angles because I believe you can look at this injury through two different lenses, and it's all dependent on how you looked at the injuries suffered by Love last season. The good thing that everyone will unanimously agree on in Packers land, not going to affect his status, shouldn't affect his status for week one against the Lions, so you dodge that bullet. I do wonder if this happened in season, does Jordan Love miss a game? I mean, thankfully, that's a question that won't have to be answered because he is missing a week of practice. I would assume he probably would miss a game, but how much of that is precautionary, waiting for him to return next week, who knows? But if it's the regular season, there's a chance he ends up missing a game. And we know last year he missed in totality, if you combine everything all together, pretty much 3 games, 2 full games. Week 2, week 3 against Indianapolis and Tennessee, and then Love missing the second half against Jacksonville, and the week 18 loss to Chicago, missing, I think it was a little over 2 quarters after that elbow injury, kind of that funny bone, that tingly, numbing feeling on your elbow when you land or mess with the funny bone. But I think there's 2 ways to look at last season for Jordan Love with the injuries, really his season in total as well. And if you talk to Matt LaFleur or you talk to Jordan Love, and we saw the comments, I think it was back in May, LaFleur kind of shooting down some questions where people were, I think people bringing up the word regression with Jordan Love and taking a step back in the passing game in 2024. And LaFleur kind of thought that was just like nonsense and foolish to bring up, but I think it was something that was on the mind of many. And I think if you look at it objectively, at a bare minimum, you could say, hey, the second half of the 2025 season with the passing game specifically for Green Bay looked nothing like what we saw in the second half of 2024 and steamrolling into the playoffs and going to Jerry World and lighting the world on fire. The passing game, the defense was great that game too, but Jordan Love was ascending to a point at the end of 2024 where people are like, this is a top 10 quarterback. This might be a top 8 quarterback in the NFL. In 2025, you're kind of left scratching your head. It was stagnant at times in the second half. It seemed a bit funky in the passing game. And it's not all Jordan Love. You know, I think you could talk about it schematically. You could talk about it with Love, some of those injuries. We'll get to that in a second. You could talk about it with some of the wide receivers. You know, Dobbs, Wicks, Reed, Watson, at least one, hopefully 2, was, you know, the hope for Green Bay last year would ascend to another level in their game and in their career. And we really didn't see any of those wide receivers really take off to that next level. They were fine in large part. You know, drops were an issue, things of that nature. Injury bug bit a couple of times. You know, Dobbs had a couple of concussions. Watson with the ACL injury in week 18. But in large part, none of them took that big step forward that many had assumed would happen organically or had hoped would happen. And so I think there's a lot of different things there's like a lot of different angles to look at with the passing game. But I think it's slightly foolish to suggest that, you know, in 2025, the passing game looked just like it did in 2024. Like, no, there was something missing. There were some ingredients missing. There was maybe it was chemistry issues. It looked off, especially in the second half of the season. Now, where Jordan Love factors into this is, there's sort of like a great mystery, and it just depends on what side of the coin you fall on. So, some will look at the injuries for Jordan Love and say, you know what? There's 3 different injuries. Like, clearly they lingered, the MCL injury and the groin injury suffered against Jacksonville, and so a lot of people will look at some of the pitfalls for the passing game and some of the struggles and say, I believe it was just because of the injuries to Jordan Love, and that's a completely fine stance to have. And many will believe we'll see more of that second half 2024 offense, second half 2024 passing game more specifically if Jordan Love is healthy this year. And some will say, I don't know, maybe there's just more to this. And what exactly is Jordan Love? Is he a top 8 quarterback? Is he a top 10 quarterback? Like, I think this 2025 season, health pending for Jordan Love, will tell us a hell of a lot about what we need to know for what type of quarterback he is. Entering his third year as a starter, has the financial security on his big deal, which he had entering last year as well. But this year will tell us a lot if Jordan Love is healthy. They surround him with more weapons this offseason. Matthew Golden, Savion Williams. You bring in a veteran like Mecole Hardman, who had his struggles against the Jets, but could offer you something in the offense, especially special teams as a punt returner, if he makes the roster. But this year will tell us a lot. But I do think with the injuries with Jordan Love, it's after this most recent one, it's fair to ask, like, is this going to be a trend? It's not his fault. It is not Jordan Love's fault. You talk about a thumb injury, torn ligament, suffered in the game against the Jets, banged the thumb off the helmet of an opposing player for New York while getting sacked, and it's a torn ligament. It's not his fault. Just like week 1 last year. MCL injury, I think it was second last play of the game. That field was shit. I mean, Kenny Clark ripped into those field conditions in Brazil. If you remember, Packers-Eagles week 1 was in Brazil, neutral site, and Kenny Clark really ripped into the field conditions. So did other players, but Kenny Clark went above and beyond, and he himself suffered, a foot injury that ended up lingering the entire season for Kenny Clark in 2024. And so some might look at it and be like, look, those field conditions sucked, MCL injury, and then Love comes back in week 4 after missing weeks 2 and 3, and he clearly didn't look 100%. He wasn't mobile. Wasn't able to bounce things outside of the pocket on some broken plays and make things work through that prism for the offense and for Matt LaFleur. And you could tell that the Packers, I don't think, rushed him back. The Packers have never, ever been known for having a medical team that is going to clear a player a week early. They'd much rather do it a week later than a week earlier, which is something I actually appreciate about him. I know some fans get a little more riled up about it. But that MCL injury lingered. And then you had the groin injury in Jacksonville, and that clearly lingered for at least a couple of weeks, whether the Packers were yelling it from the mountaintops, and they weren't. That clearly Love was not at 100% even after returning that following week after suffering the groin injury against Jacksonville and then the elbow injury against Chicago. And so I think some people can look at it and be like, look, everyone gets hurt, everyone's nicked up, and, that old adage where, people talk about, once you reach December, late November, December, every player on every team's hurt in some capacity. Nobody's feeling 100%, and that's true, but, a lot of guys still don't miss games. And, again, it's not Jordan Love's fault. I'm not blaming him for any of this, but you can look at it through the prism of, hey, you know what? He only missed, in totality, about 3 games. It's not much. Or you can look at it and say, you know what? He had 3 separate injuries in one season, an MCL, a groin, and an elbow. And that's where I think there's sort of a divide in the road, and fans will take a different pathway where some will be like, it's fine, it's not a big deal, sweep it under the rug. And others will be like, 3 injuries last year, a thumb injury now after the first preseason game. And again, they'll just bring up the question, like, is Jordan Love just going to be a guy who's going to be more prone to injuries, more prone to potentially missing time due to an array of different injuries that could pop up? Again, not his fault, but we have seen basketball, baseball, football, some players, some athletes are just more susceptible to injuries that cost them playing time. And you hope that's not the case with Jordan Love, but it's a fair question or a fair point to at least bring to the table and have a discussion about. There's no doubting, like, Jordan Love's got to be perturbed by this. It's not good news. The good part of it is that it's the non-throwing hand that he tore the ligament in his thumb on. Again, I wonder if it would have cost him a regular season game. Thankfully, we don't have to go down that road or down that path. But I think how you view the 2024 season for Jordan Love comes down to how much do you think those injuries were really lingering? Because if you think it affected his play a hell of a lot, you're probably in the camp that's expecting to see, if Jordan Love's healthy this year, what we saw in the second half of 2024 and rolling into the playoffs. And if you're on the other side of the coin, you probably have more questions as to, how high that ceiling is for Jordan Love as a quarterback. And I think it's a worthwhile discussion. I don't want to sit on the fence and say it's somewhere in between, but it's hard for me to imagine he went through that stretch in the second half of 2024 and it was just some flash in the pan ordeal. I think if healthy, he looks more like that this year, and the passing game looks more like that this year. At least that's, the fingers crossed, let's hope sort of mindset. It's hard for me to picture him putting together that stretch of games. It wasn't just one or two. It was the entire second half, and it was his first playoff start. Think about the butterflies, the nerves that had to be going through the system for really both sides. Obviously, for a playoff game, it's do or die, it's win or go home, whatever cliche you want to use. But for Jordan Love, a lot of pressure, whether admittedly or not, replacing a legend in Aaron Rodgers. And in his first playoff start, in his first year as a starter, he goes to Dallas and just absolutely shreds that Cowboys defense. So I believe it's in there. And I guess if I had to choose, and I'm fine doing it, those injuries last year I think really, really lingered. It wasn't as though Love had, 4 or 5 weeks under his belt in the 2024 season and then had the MCL injury, and then it lingered, and then, the play became kind of a roller coaster ride and kind of unpredictable. It was right out of the gates week 1. And if you remember, he had a pretty damn good game against the Eagles week 1 in that game against Brazil. He was playing pretty damn well. I know the Packers lost the game, but the offense did its part. I'll have to look, but I think the final was like 33-28 or something like that. 34-29. 34-29 was the final score week 1 a year ago. And so I am on the side that I think it's in there, but he's got to stay healthy. I think those injuries last year, an MCL, they did not rush him back, but he clearly did not look himself when he came back week 4 against Minnesota. The groin injury against Jacksonville clearly was not mobile to the degree that we've seen Jordan Love be a mobile quarterback. And he's not like some, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, like true dual threat where any given week Jordan Love's going to run for 70 to 90 yards. Like that's not part of his game. It doesn't need to be a part of his game, but certainly mobility is an element that he possesses, and we just didn't really see it much last year at all. And that's something LaFleur's talked about in the offseason. So I think if healthy, we'll see more of that 2024, but I think if you're worried about the injuries, it's a valid point to at least bring up. And again, I will say it again, just to hammer it home. It's not his fault. It's not the dude's fault. But if you're wondering, could this dude just be injury prone? It's a fair take to at least present at this point in time, because it wasn't just one injury last year. It was 3 separate injuries and now one again this year. And I think before that, you got to remember he was a backup for Aaron Rodgers his first couple of years. But I think it was his first season, 2020, there was no preseason, if I remember correctly, right, because of COVID. And then 2021, we see him first preseason action. And in his first preseason game, he had that shoulder injury and was removed from the game in the preseason back in 2021. And then he was a backup. And then, first year as a starter, obviously goes pretty damn good. Last year, 3 different injuries. And now you have one this offseason. I think an underrated, I don't think underrated is the right word to use. I'm trying to figure out how I want to phrase it. But like a part of this that isn't getting attention that I think truly matters is there is value in these reps that Jordan Love is getting with all of his weapons in training camp and preseason, a little bit that he plays, but especially with these rookies. Matthew Golden, I truly believe will have a bigger role than maybe is being led on at this point. Like you talk about trust, and like Matthew Golden might already have the most trustworthy hands on this team. I mean, you want to be point blank matter of fact about it. He might have the best hands on the team, and he's a rookie, first round pick out of Texas. And you took Savion Williams in the 3rd round, and Savion Williams has missed a lot of camp trying to get back from a concussion. And I think getting that rapport, that chemistry, that rhythm down with the rookies is very, very valuable. I do. And maybe you roll your eyes at it and say, nah, it doesn't really matter. That's fine. I think it does matter to get those reps in training camp and try to develop a rapport. You remember, was it the year, I could be wrong on this, but I think the year the Packers drafted Dobbs and Watson and Rodgers didn't really want to show up to camp. And at that point, in his career, it's like, how valuable is it? And I'm not saying he didn't want to show up to camp, but it's like those off-season activities that are voluntary. It's like, I'll probably pass on that. And a lot of people were like, get in there and get the reps with the rookies and start building that chemistry. I think that's valuable for Love with Golden and Savion Williams. I'll say with Golden because I do believe he'll have a really strong role on this offense this year. And for Williams, it's critical because he's already missed a chunk of camp, again, while recovering from the concussion. And so even though it's just a week, you can look at it and be like, it's just a week. He'll be back next week. I think that matters. I really, really do, especially for a passing game that, again, just looked a bit off, especially in the second half of 2024. Now you have two rookies, one who I think will play a major factor in how the 2025 passing game story is told for Green Bay. And so, yeah, I think missing a week of those reps, I think it matters when you're trying to get that chemistry down, especially considering like you're not going to have Christian Watson right out of the gates and Jaden Reed's in a boot. And there was no clarity provided on whether or not he'll be ready for week one. And if that's the case, then you're looking at, Dobbs and Wicks and boom, there's Matthew Golden. So I think those reps matter, and that's an angle of this that isn't really being talked about, which is fine. Obviously, the focus is on Jordan Love and the torn ligament, but it'll be a fascinating season just to, if he's healthy, I think we find out a lot about Jordan Love, and if he's not, and more injuries pop up on the radar, then we really start questioning, is this a guy who's just going to be more susceptible to that throughout his career? Hopefully that's not the case, but we'll see. Jordan Love, torn ligament, left thumb, non-throwing hand. I think Goody used the phrase he had the procedure to fix it, or maybe he's having. Either way, he called it a little procedure. Goody did, a little or a minor procedure, and that he shouldn't miss any regular season time. Let me know what you guys and gals think. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please click the subscribe button if you haven't already. Always appreciative of all the support. We'll see you next time.